Brett, welcome to the Commerce Talks show. Today it's heavyweight weeks in Commerce Talks about B2B. Yesterday, Kurt Anderson was my guest, and we talked about the B2B market in the US. Today, we talk about the B2B market on the other side of the planet. You are representing like the Australian B2B ecosystem. Maybe I'm overarching here, but before I'm doing that, please introduce yourself and the B2B E-Commerce Association.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. It's really good to be here. Just let your listeners know to forgive me if there's any pauses or stuttering today. I'm dealing with a 9-month-old baby that doesn't sleep very well, so running on a very low amount of juice right now. But yeah, Brett Sinclair, founder of the B2B E-Commerce Association. So I've been working in the industry for nearly 15 years, work with manufacturers and distributors in helping them enable commerce experiences. But I've worked right across the ecosystem, from being on the client side to the implementation of platforms and on the technology vendor side. So I've got a fair amount of perspective across the industry. But yeah, I launched the B2B E-Commerce Association 2 years ago, and it was really built around, originally my thinking was around helping educate, manufacturers and distributors and the leadership within those companies around what are the fundamentals for success in e-commerce in the context of a manufacturer and distributor. And then I was kind of looking at the ways that, the online retail community had been organized over the past sort of decade. And there was a lot of alumni that had been created and networking groups that had been created, particularly down here, but I know that there's several of them across the world, and kind of came to the epiphany around, bringing together the B2B commerce community into a central place to start to have a conversation and bring the vendors and the various parties into the same room so we can all start to learn off each other, build networks and create opportunities.
Yeah, and I saw on your LinkedIn profile, you're in the market like for e-commerce now for, a long time, like over 10, 12 years. You've worked for Intershop, which is also like an e-commerce vendor. You've worked for Adobe, Magento. And if I remember correctly, the discussions 10 years ago, usually B2B was not the big topic on the vendor side. It was rather focused on B2C features. How can we integrate like a better search capability? How will the product detail page look nicer? And usually the critique from the B2B manufacturers was that is not what we want. We have very, very different challenges. But the B2C market was growing so fast, so most of the vendors were focusing on B2C. What have you seen there? Because you've represented some vendors for a couple of years. So how close are the vendors from yesterday and today's vendors? How close are they to the B2B requirements?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I was pretty lucky in my career because, I landed at Intershop quite early on, and I kind of fell into it a little bit based on where I'd come from. I'd started out in the online retail sector and kind of learned a lot about, that direct-to-consumer experience and online marketing and those types of operations. And, I landed at Intershop, and, the origins of Intershop had traditionally been a lot of B2B companies that they'd been working with for a long time in Europe. And we had a lot of, which was uncommon at the time, really, in Australia. We had a nice portfolio of customers that were B2B focused. So I got a lot of exposure early on into that category around, what are the complexities and the challenges that you have in implementing e-commerce in a B2B environment. And a lot of it is about, change management. And it's an interesting company because I still have some contacts there that I, stayed in touch with, and I've worked with them at other places along the journey. And we still actually talk about, that question around what has changed. I think that there's been a lot of change, and obviously the last 2 years there's been a realization that there needs to be a significantly larger investment into their B2B e-commerce experience, and the foundations. A lot of the foundations need to be rebuilt to support those self-service experiences. But a lot of the challenges that I was working on 7, 8, 9, even 10 years ago are still there today. The conversation hasn't moved as much as what people would think in a lot of scenarios for B2B companies. And I talk about that more around, having really, robust product data, having the right people in the right seats, understanding, the impacts that implementing a commerce system is going to have upstream and downstream in your business, that stakeholder management required. So there's a lot of things that, the things are moving quickly, and people have made that realization around that this is now core business for any B2B company to have a digital experience or a self-service experience. But there's still, very low levels of maturity in areas where people need to catch up, particularly in this market.
Can you describe a bit the Australian B2B market? So people from the European ecosystem definitely think about B2B more about the continental part of Europe, the middle, in Austria, Germany, B2B is very strong. With Kurt yesterday, I've learned that over 80% or 75% of all B2B companies are rather small. So most of the manufacturers do have like 10, 20, maybe 30 people. So it's specialized on like one or two parts in the supply chain. How does it look in Australia?
Yeah, it's interesting market. You've sort of got your sort of big enterprise end of town with a lot of the global brands that are B2B companies across all the classical sectors that you would expect, and they have different operating models depending on the type of structure that they have. So some of them are kind of running independently, somewhat in their own business models in the Australian market, where others are more closely tied to the global HQ, and a lot of the decisions around technology and how they're structured and what they're investing in is being driven down from headquarters. Like I'm sure, at Spryker, they have some of those implementations where, the platform is being built out of a certain region, and, you'll hand down into a region like Australia. Here is what you get. These are the tools. You can't change too much. If you want to change something, you'll head, you have to ask the head office to put a request in, and you hope it kind of gets done. And then you've got this other distribution market. So I guess because Australia is so far away, there's a lot of distributors in region that have the licenses for a number of brands, and they may be selling into retail channels within region. And with similar to a lot of other markets, we have some big retailers that dominate the market, either in the in the pure play online sense or in a more of an omni-channel bricks and mortar scenario. So one of the challenges that a lot of the B2B companies have in this region is, as a distributor or a manufacturer, is that the channel conflict is still a really big issue. And being able to, have any relationship direct to customer is still quite a sensitive topic. And it's still not clear to many of them how they can participate in those channels. But, last 2 years has seen a significant move in that area to start to want to own those channels. But I think it's also a missed opportunity as well, because I'm finding that a lot of B2B companies, not just only in Australia, but everywhere, can get quite fixated on the D2C opportunity. Yet if you dig into their B2B business and their operations, there's so many opportunities to increase revenue with B2B customers and decrease, operating costs through B2B technology and smarter automation within their existing core business. And often that can get neglected as well. So I'm seeing that as a common trend.
Yeah, in the European and the US markets, I think the Corona time was a big push for B2B digitalization strategies, because field force wasn't allowed to visit customers, and many of the contacts that have been made before with handshakes had to be made then via Zoom or Teams. My understanding is that in Australia there was even a stricter COVID controls, or really like 18 months kind of a permanent lockdown kind of thing. Was it also then a huge push for the industry, or was the contrary the case?
No, definitely a huge push. Really, really big boom across enterprise and that mid market and that SMB area. I think one of the biggest benefits for the industry at B2B was that you had a lot of executives and senior leaders within the organizations have to stop and spend a lot more time looking at the digital experience and the commerce component, and probably spend more time than they usually would on these types of projects, and actually understand how these projects come together and how the nuts and bolts come together. And I think that's been really good because obviously, more investment into that and understanding around these projects and these technologies can help move things forward. So that's always been a challenge in the past, but obviously when you had a small amount of revenue attributed to the online channel, it just wasn't a big enough focus for the business. But when you increase that, and then there's things that are fundamentally not correct, or you have a weakness in an integration or a bottleneck somewhere, and that gets magnified, people then want to solve that problem, and they start to invest in that because they can see the direct benefit. But obviously, down here they had no choice; they had to do something, right? So, but I think people that hadn't invested were obviously caught out, because they weren't as digitally mature to capitalize.
And now, post-pandemic, it's not really post-pandemic, but it's like post like the first couple of waves. What are the top 3 challenges? Are B2B companies really looking out for, hey, now I've understood that digital is like the thing to do, or are they rather focusing on the most recent supply chain issues that are actually ramping up again?
Yeah, I think it's all of the above almost. I just really look at it from different levels of digital maturity. Are you at level 1, or are you at level 3, 4, or 5 in your journey? I think that supply chain piece obviously got a lot of focus now because you need to have really good visibility on your inventory because the time frames that aren't consistent anymore. You don't know when this product is going to arrive, or if it's going to arrive. So, I'm doing a lot of work in the supply chain, the digital supply chain category now, around getting that visibility and transforming the supply chain so you can start to get more visibility in what is happening and making smarter decisions around your demand planning. But I think all those fundamentals are still there. Like product data is still a massive issue for a lot of customers. A lot of B2B companies can't. It's obviously a very unsexy topic that no one often wants to own within an organization. But it's still at the forefront of a lot of the challenges that people are facing. And then, if you are more digitally mature, you've got the B2B companies who are looking at B2B marketplaces or ramping up their direct to consumer experience, being more sophisticated in the way they personalize and the way they use customer data across channels.
Mm. And what would you say, like from an e-commerce perspective, and that's actually the market you've worked in exactly. I'm still working on the vendor side. What are the solutions they are looking into? So what kind of problems they are still needing to solve? Is it still like the evergreen product data management thing on B2B? Is it more now like really becoming a B2B marketplace, or is it something else?
I think the biggest challenge that they're facing is still people. It's getting the right people into the organization that can help them make the right decisions. Because obviously, I'm sure you're aware, Alex, you experience it a lot where you get the inertia with a B2B company struggling to move forward. They want to do something, but they're not sure where to start. Don't fully understand it, don't have a key decision maker that can sort of traverse. I mean, the challenge of commerce and B2B especially is you need to be able to traverse across many different disciplines and have many different conversations to be an effective product leader within that environment. And obviously, B2B comes with its complexity. So very difficult for B2B companies to attract the right talent to come and work for them and get them into the business to be able to make some sound decisions So I think that is still the number one obstacle for companies, is structuring their teams correctly. But then, then it is really about, I guess, things that are holding people back. Like, I still think it is people not being able to line up, their data correctly across the systems, or having a architecturally a model where they can't easily integrate or make changes across their ecosystem of applications or customers, depending on what they want to do and what business models they want to drive.
My understanding always with this people problem, or with this bottleneck in hiring the right talent, was initially there were no structure at B2B or companies, so there was no like digital department. So they needed kind of the jack of all trades, which is hard to find always. Now we have in most B2B companies, we have structure. We have now a generation in the leadership that understands like e-commerce and digital challenges. But what I see still often is they do have a hard time to compete with B2C or big corporate like salaries or perks like remote work, because many B2B companies are working very traditional. So I would argue there is no people bottleneck anymore. It's still a mindset, hiring mindset problem in B2B company. That's very easy to say here where we stand when you're like in the middle of Australia looking for talent, but I would argue there's talent around, and you can even hire like in the more or less the same time zone, like talent in the Philippines that definitely can help you out. But there's this kind of mindset is not there yet. Would you disagree?
I agree. I agree with that. Definitely. I think, probably should have framed it more around, if I think about a traditional B2B company, they're not in a city. It's not a sexy product, maybe a brand that the e-commerce leader has never heard of. Still could be a big business transacting a lot of volume, but attracting that person to come and work for them, like you say, it doesn't have the perks and the sexiness of a maybe a larger retail brand. So coming to the table with the right story to attract that sort of person to come and work for you is obviously difficult for a B2B company, and particularly when you're hiring for roles that typically you don't understand, right? So if I'm senior leader at B2B manufacturer, I understand what I need to, what good looks like from a sales manager perspective, or an operations manager, or a supply chain manager, or a head of customer service. I know those roles. My whole business is built around that. So it's finding that those new bodies and having the right talk track to get them in is obviously difficult as well.
Oh, okay, and when we are going a bit further, now let's say as a B2B company, you have solved like the initial challenges. You have now a team in place. You have now like the basic technology in place. You know how to manage your product data, not in Excel sheets, but in a modern system. So what kind of progressive strategies do you see in the market? In Europe, there's now a big peak in B2B marketplace projects. So we are seeing many of those projects because Spryker is the only integrated modern commerce software that is offering this kind of capability. But is this also something like a mid-sized B2B company in Australia is looking at, or is it a very different thing?
Potentially a little bit different. So probably, have some of them look at it, but they probably don't. A mid-market B2B company in Australia typically doesn't have the budget to go after a marketplace, to launch their own B2B marketplace model. And I say that not in the sense of the software component, more around the operationally, what it means to onboard a number of suppliers and be able to manage that business model. But the ones that are more progressive, like I've got a good example in this region would be a brand like Signet, which is a packaging company, mid-market packaging company that's been really successful in their digital commerce strategy. Started out focusing on, what I really like was focusing on their core operations of B2B and using that technology to enhance their core business and developing that self-service experience, which allowed their salespeople to be a lot smarter with their existing B2B customers and to service them better, not necessarily about, removing a salesperson and making it all digital was giving them more better exposure, better data to enable them to service them better and create a more personalized experience using the platform. But then they've evolved into targeting smaller accounts that they usually wouldn't target, with a direct-to-consumer play. And, they've been able to onboard that long tail really, really well into their business. And probably where they're more progressive than most B2B companies is now they're really leaning into the brand side of things with their digital channels. So really starting to create high content velocity with what you might say packaging. Packaging might just sound to people like packaging's pretty boring, right? But they're really starting to market their brand and be quite progressive in the way that they talk to customers and get in front of them. Because they know that's where their customers are. They're not in those traditional channels anymore. They're not reading catalogs or waiting for an email from the sales guy. They're hitting them in these other channels to build their brand and start to be more personalized.
But we can be honest here, right? So I totally get this argument that salespeople will have a different role in the future. But many projects I've seen kind of failed because just giving a salesperson that was in the field before a tablet with some information about the product and the customer usually doesn't work, because the way how you must work with this kind of data is very different. So you need to become kind of an analyst data guy or girl in order to use it, in order to create really a tailored offer, instead of having the same catalog for every customer and saying, okay, you're getting like 3% discount, you're getting 5% discount based on your recent order. And many people do have, especially like from the sales teams, do have a very hard time to adapt. Plus, on the other hand, many agencies from the digital ecosystem will come pitching the B2B companies saying, okay, you can save money on the sales side because it's getting much more automated and efficient. And obviously, we have a little conflict here, which is not easy to solve. And if I had to be honest, so for many salespeople, I would say, okay, look for another job. Try to become a data analyst and really become like the digital leader, which in most cases won't work. So look for another job.
Yeah, well, I think, it comes back now to that, what's the future of hiring look like for a B2B company? Do you, in those roles that, maybe you need to hire a new salesperson, do you necessarily look for someone that has industry experience in your category and is a traditional salesperson, or do you start to look outside the square a little bit left field, and start to look for maybe someone who has technology experience and understands how to use systems? So I think where a lot of this is going for a lot of companies is that, you need to be really good inside the tools operationally to use those tools like you're describing. Those are the future people that are going to be able to succeed in these organizations, is to be able to have that capability to sort of move between those areas. So, but I think, there's, and if you're not wanting to lean into the conversation, I think that's a big challenge, obviously, just all round when you talk about any B2B company wanting to invest more in digital and commerce. So obviously it can be a very uncomfortable conversation if it's something that you don't know much about. And I think there's a stigma out there that, you should know all this stuff now. It's 2022. And if you're in a leadership role or in a management role, that you should know something about digital and e-commerce. And there's a lot of people out there who are too afraid to ask the dumb question or put their hand up and say, look, I actually don't know anything about this space. I don't understand what you're talking about, but you're better off to lead with that and learn rather than, I guess, put your head in the sand and think that it's going to go away, or, because if you don't have it, that's why originally when I started the B2B Commerce Association, my goal was I wanted people to understand how the fundamental components of all of the systems in the architecture and the processes all came together. Because once you understand that, a lot of the things start to make more sense. So, because if you don't, I think you're always playing catch up if you don't understand the fundamentals and how they connect, which makes it difficult for people to just always never quite get it.
Mm. Okay, and then you shortly mentioned about the D2C challenges, let's say the D2C focus. That is definitely a thing that came up the last 10 years that many companies learned that, oh, maybe I don't need all the distributors. Maybe I can market my products directly at a marketplace or put out a website to reach my customers. Kurt yesterday explained to me that there's like very successful strategies in the US where some B2B manufacturers focusing on a specific niche, building lots of content around it, and therefore getting traction, even like from SEO channels or from Google. Is it still a big thing? Do many B2B companies like in your network want to become a bit more independent and therefore trying out direct to consumer strategies?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think, particularly for privately owned companies as well, where they're, maybe they have a pathway that they want to sell their business in 5 years from now, understanding that direct to consumer data could, have a significant impact on their valuation as a company, and it can allow them obviously to control their own destiny more and be able to have that a better understanding of maybe what their customers want from them. But I think, there's still a lot of challenges with direct-to-consumer model for the manufacturer or distributor, depending on really what their goals are. I guess if they're looking to replicate the volume of sales that they are in the B2B environment, typically that's going to involve a lot of discounting that they're not willing to do. But the biggest challenge that I find that B2B companies have in the direct-to-consumer model is that they're not very strong at marketing. So traditionally not very strong at traditional marketing, let alone digital marketing, and all of those areas of discipline that you talk about, like, SEO and paid media has become a lot more complex with the various channels and that social media and the branding that you need to do. Because in my experience, and that was previous life that I had, I was setting up direct to consumers websites and doing that component of the digital marketing operations, and it's the amount of content velocity that you need to create, and you need to be executing across all those areas very, very well in order to drive the outcomes that people want. But I think the undervalued area of that effort is that even if you aren't getting those sales direct to consumer, maybe you're not discounting, you're still significantly enhancing and supporting your B2B sales in store by having a presence and doing that marketing. Because it's we've got retailers, B2B companies in Australia now, they can't rely on their traditional retail or house of brands to market their product properly because they're not getting the foot traffic that they used to get in the store. So they need to start to take over some of that marketing themselves.
I've been at the Shop Talks Europe this week, and one of the fancy topics obviously was again metaverse, IoT, augmented reality. Are these topics that are seriously discussed in your B2B environment?
I've seen it starting to pop up a little bit. Certain categories where they're wanting to do some sort of in situ augmented reality VR experience, but still very, very early days for any of that stuff down here at the moment. So, but there is a partner in the B2B Commerce Association that does that stuff quite well. And I was on a call with him the other day, and he there was he's had a lot of growth, a lot of major brands that are looking, experimenting with that technology. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes.
Okay, but it's not like it's not consuming more than like 5% of time, even like for the innovation manager in a B2B company. I'm glad to hear, because I even think that shouldn't consume more than 1% at B2C companies.
Yeah, well, yeah. When you talk about all the other problems that were discussed here, it's one of those things, isn't it? Though someone comes in with the sexy proposal and and they're looking for always looking for the silver bullet, Alex, to move the needle.
Yeah, I think the silver bullet is still, like 10 years ago, is still personalization. So we haven't achieved like 10% of the level that was promised by the vendors like 10 years ago. So if we are getting a bit closer to what we've promised 10 years ago, then that might become the silver bullet.
Yeah, I was just talking to my wife actually before about personalization. How many brands that you think would be able to do it just still can't do it?
Yeah. Even the big ones, even the ones with technical,
the big ones,
technical capabilities. Yeah. Then last question. So, what the big thing's going to happen until end of this year, 2022, for the B2B Association? Any big events? Any like big announcements to be expected?
Yeah, it's going from strength to strength. It's really exciting. So we're getting more and more people from various parts of the world signing up and wanting to get involved in the community. So when I launched it in 2020, the premise of that of the model was there were going to be a lot of physical events, and obviously that didn't happen. So we're just getting started back on that at the end of the year. October. We've got our first physical conference, in partnership with an organisation down here that runs a lot of popular online events. So it's called, in-person events. It's called iMedia B2B E-commerce Summit in partnership with the B2B Commerce Association. So we're all heading up to the industry, heading up to the Gold Coast to get some sun and talk some B2B. So that's exciting. But the guys, we've got a plan to start to roll that out into different parts of the world as we get some momentum, and we've got some other networking events coming up. So yeah, we're just excited to have everyone leaning into the idea, and we're looking forward to continuing to grow the network so everyone can benefit from it.
Yeah, I usually end this call saying it would be great to see at one of the next events, but like the flight to Australia is such a long flight that it would be live, so it's very unlikely. But let's see, maybe we can make it. Maybe we can make it happen within the next 12 months.
Yeah. Well, Chris will be there, so we have to get you down, and we'll put you on stage.
I try my best. Brett, thank you for your time. Until next time.